Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you to the Sentinels Newsmakers, the special series wherein we speak to some of the key voices from the Northeast. And today on Newsmakers, I am going to discuss the incidents like Bois Locker Room. Now, many of you, my viewers, are already aware of what Boys Locker Room is all about. But I'm sure there might be few of them who are not really glued into what Boys Locker Room is all about. So, just a brief update here about what this entire thing that I'm talking about and that we are going to discuss today is all about. So, Boys Locker Room is a social group. It's a social media group that was, created by a bunch of school-going kids aged between 16 to 18. These boys belong to some of the elite schools of South Delhi. They had created this particular group on the social media platform called Instagram. But the problem is why this became a big news in the past few days, and we are still talking about it, is because these boys who are in their teens, what they did with this particular platform is that they allegedly shared certain pictures, certain objectionable pictures of women, girls, in fact, of minors, of girls barely 14 years old. And they not just that, they also apparently shared pictures, nude pictures, morphed pictures of women, of girls. Now it became a big issue. The police has taken cognizance of the fact. There is a court case now going on in the Delhi High Court. A CBI, people are seeking CBI investigation into the whole issue. Now this is the backdrop of what we are going to discuss today. Now, this is not the only incident. What we are going to talk about is that why such things happen. Are the families, the parents, the whole educational system, we as a society are failing our children somewhere? What is lacking? Is it to do with the mental, the physical health of our children? So, to talk about all of these issues, I am joined today by Professor Dr. Upasana Mahanta. She is the Executive Director, Center for Women, Law and Change, Jindal Global Law School. Upasana, warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much.
Also joining me on the show today is Dr. Sangeeta Datta. She is the consultant psychiatrist. Hi, Sangeeta. Welcome.
Hello.
Lady.
Thank you so much.
Welcome to the Sentinels Newsmakers. So, first, would like to come to you, Upasana.
Yes.
Why do you think such things happen? Because you're already professor, you're closely involved with children, youth. So, why such incidents? Because this, of course, is just another incident that has come to light. There are a lot of similar things happening. Why?
First of all, thank you. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be part of this very important panel and a conversation that is very close to my heart. It's a very interesting question as to, why does this happen? And is this the only incident that has happened? Clearly, no. Are these only instances where we see, these kind of normalization of violence? That we see these kind of display of certain kind of toxic masculine behavior? Definitely no. But I think one thing we all must recognize, and it's very important to have a conversation around, the fact that there is normalization of violence, there is normalization of misogyny, there is normalization of sexism in our day-to-day life. So platforms, instances, the guy's locker room talk, the violence that one faces on the street, violence that one faces at home, they are reflections of the larger social realities of which we are part of. And those larger social realities are, the fact that we live in a deeply patriarchal, a deeply, hierarchical society where there is everybody do not have the same kind of access to power and privilege, and your gender determines to a large extent your access to power and privilege. And those realities get reflected in the way we behave, in the way our families behave, in the way society, communities, and as a result, our children behave.
Right.
So I think it
Right.
is very important to unpack the daily realities, the everyday realities that sort of shape the behavior of genders in society. And I keep my response brief, and we can have this conversation in detail when we go ahead further. But I think also to be able to acknowledge that to talk about masculinity is not necessarily to talk about one kind of bodies, or to talk about men, or to talk about femininities is to talk about women, and to talk about the fact that only one gender perpetuates violence against the other gender, but how violence has become part of our very socio-cultural realities, and how those realities shape and sort of perpetuate the kind of violence that we see in the context of boys' locker room.
No. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Let's bring in Sangeeta here. Sangeeta, what are your thoughts? Why do we keep seeing all of these things? And it's in a way pretty disturbing. When you see school-going kids do stuff like this, it's really disturbing. I mean, I'm sure many of the parents, they must be finding it so hard to even look at all of these things, and they must be really fearing about their girl child going to the school. So many worries now.
Yes, I completely agree with what Upasana has just now mentioned. But in addition to that, there are many factors that need to be discussed. One is upbringing of children, which is very important, what is taught to them at home. And apart from that, the kind of education they receive in the school or in educational institutions, that's also very important. What are we emphasizing on when we educate children? That's the other thing. The other aspect is the other issues which need to be discussed is the kind of inputs that they get, the children, the adolescents, on a daily basis. What they see in movies, what they see in serials, what they see in maybe item songs where there is objectification of women, etc. The inputs. And of course, we cannot forget adolescence itself, because when we talk about boys' locker room, we have to understand that they were of a particular age group, which means that now when we talk about adolescence, all of us know it is a transitional state between childhood and adulthood. And during adolescence, because of hormonal changes, it is very normal for a boy or a girl to feel curiosity, to feel curious about each other's bodies, etc., etc. But what has happened in the boys' locker room story or the incident, that is far beyond what should happen during normal adolescence, because and perhaps it also talks about absence of the right kind of sex education in our maybe in our culture, in our country, etc. So when we talk about upbringing, sometimes parents say that, well, there is no gender bias in the family, but there are very subtle cues, very subtle signals of gender bias in many families, and people don't even realize it. The way a boy is brought up and the way a girl is brought up, a lot of people would say, no, I never had to face gender bias, but in many families, it's still prevalent. We have to agree. And apart from that, there is absence of role model in the family, because when a child, as the child grows up, be it a girl or be it a boy, when the child grows up and does not see the father respecting the mother, okay, respect can be, you have to have role models to actually whom you watch and you imbibe your values from.
And we'll come back to this role. Yeah, we'll come back to this role model aspect of yours. But let me bring in Upasana here. Let's go across to Upasana. Upasana, Sangeeta mentioned two things: the whole sex education part, and also the role of the education system, the teachers, the professors. Here, I would like to bring you in. What do you think? Because these are things that we have been talking about over and over again. I'll go back to Sangeeta when it comes to the whole thing about the mental health, and also about the family aspect and everything else, and also like the role model thing that she had mentioned. But regarding the whole education system, the syllabus, the sex education part? What do you think?
My response to that question will be twofold. One is when we are talking about education at the school level, and second, when we are talking about education at a higher level. Okay,
Right.
for example, in the higher education, educational institutions, and so on and so forth. So, actually, what happens in our country, or actually in countries across the world, it is not a problem unique to our country. What you see is that the teachers, the trainers, the educators are themselves not trained to be able to talk about sex education. They also come into the classroom with the same kind of biases that all of us have in our in our heads, in our minds. And all of us believe, like, for example, before a child is born, we have decided that boys will like blue and girls will like pink. We have decided how the child will walk. We have decided how the child is supposed to sit. We have decided what kind of clothes the child is supposed to wear, what kind of toys the child is supposed to play with. And that kind of socialization has happened even before the child is born. So there is a pattern of behavior that we have already expected the child to display as the child is growing up. Now, that kind of expectation keeps getting reinforced through what we do in the school system, through what we do in the community, through what we do in various other kinds of social institutions that exist in society. That is one. The second important thing, I'll give you an example. My daughter, who's now 5 years old, had started going to the creche probably around 3 years back. And, like many parents, we try to bring our kids up with ideas of gender fluidity, with no rigid ideas of gender norms, and so on and so forth. And I remember she came back from the creche one day and she told me, "Mama, do you think I like pink?" And that was a very telling question for me, because she was thinking if pink is the color that she likes. And that made me reflect a lot on this idea of, what are we telling our children? What are we telling our children with the fairy tales? What are we telling them through these damsels in distress who need to be rescued by the princes? So it is happening at various levels of education. When it comes to particularly sex education, and in many kind of surveys, many kind of studies that have happened on the question of sex education in school, you would see that often, girls and boys are separated for such conversations. There is a lot of taboo around talking about sex or sex education. Sexuality is something that we have been repressing forever. And girls are someone who are not supposed to talk about sexuality. Boys are somebody who are supposed to be aggressive about their sexuality, who are supposed to be sure about their sexuality. So there are no platforms for them to be talking about their confusions, their, sort of inherent dilemmas with the ideas of sex and sexuality. And when it comes to institutes of higher education, the situation does not become drastically different. UGC, and I know there is one more panelist, and I would really like to hear Dr. Sangeeta's thought on it. So I will keep my thoughts brief. But UGC had set up a committee called the Saksham Committee to look at the issue of gender sensitization on university campuses. And the report is extremely telling. And the report tells you how there is large-scale absence of gender sensitivity in university campuses. There are students are unwilling to talk about it. Authorities are unwilling to encourage students to talk about it. And the only way gender sensitivity is talked about is only in terms of moral policing, that girls are not supposed to go out, they're supposed to be dressing like that, and so on and so forth. So the conversations about gender sensitivity become conversation about moral policing, which is highly problematic. And final point that I would like to make is also that there is not at the school level, not at the higher education level, courses, syllabus, curriculum, modules that are talking about questions around gender, that are enabling people to reflect, to talk about it openly, not to be judged and to have safe spaces when one can talk about issues of sex and sexuality. And I think those things have contributed to shaping these, what my co-panelists spoken about, these stereotypical, standardized, conventional ideas about femininities and masculinities that we see in the movies, that we see in films, which are unattainable standards of message more or beauty. Which creates further kinds of complexities. I'll stop there.
Sangeeta, going back to what you were referring to about the not having role models, what do you mean by that?
When we talk about gender equality, in fact, I must refer to the theme of the International Women's Day 2020. The theme, it was about gender equality. Okay, so when we talk about gender equality, how do we expect children to have, attitudes which are gender equal? They learn it from home, from their childhood. And when I talk about a role model, I mean to say that, children watch their parents, or their grandparents treating each other, or how family members deal with each other. So there are very subtle cues, and there are very subtle signals in the family itself, which talks about gender bias. It's deeply there within our psyche, within our society, within our culture. Because when a girl and a boy grows up in a family, or for that matter, when a child watches his parents behave with each other.
Right. So they pick up from there, and that is how, we can still hear you, Sangeeta.
Yes, they pick up. The mother is, you can hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So the mother is often the person who goes out to work and comes back home and again gets busy with the cooking and all that. And the father goes out to work and comes back and relaxes because he's tired. So this is again gender disparity, because the mother also feels tired, right? But it is like that. Apart from that, if there's a girl and a boy in the family, then the boy is treated differently than the girl. The boy makes a mistake and then they say that, okay, it's a mistake by the boy. But when the girl makes the same mistake, people make comments in the family, maybe the father or the mother, they say that, well, you're a girl, you cannot afford to make a mistake like this because you're going to grow up and be somebody's wife. So these are there. And when it comes to, because you asked me about a role model, children often watch their elders and learn from them. If they do not see gender equality in their homes, if they see that their mothers are not treated well, or for that matter, mothers are not allowed to be tired, or they're supposed to work 24/7 round the clock, be superhumans. So they learn all these. When a boy grows up in a situation like this, he also cannot respect another woman. And if he sees domestic violence, or the father coming home drunk and beating up his wife or abusing his wife emotionally or verbally, of course the things get worse. Usually when we talk about children's personality traits, or they showing some kind of behavior which is not acceptable, we need to see their upbringing primarily. I do not say that all children who show the wrong kind of behavior come from disturbed or dysfunctional homes. I don't mean to say this at all. But mostly we will find histories, if we go deep, we'll find things there in the family itself and something wrong in the upbringing process. Sometimes what happens is when parents are very busy with their daily work, they do not get time to spend quality time with their children. So children grow up with the internet or the television, or they have different kind of inputs which are not monitored, and that way they're exposed to everything that is gender biased, and so that gets imbibed in their own personalities. That's how they become gender biased, and that's how a lot of I would say aggression, violence, and crimes happen, crimes against women.
Yeah, because they also tend to feel neglected. The love and care that they are seeking from their parents is totally not there. So maybe that is why this kind of, it gets manifest in actions like what we have seen in the boys' locker room.
Yes, during the formative years, it is very important for us to show the right kind of things to children by becoming a role model to them. When we cease to be a role model, then children are going to learn the wrong kind of things, and they're also going to have inputs from other places, from the television, from their peer groups, etc. So where again in the society, gender bias is so much there. So they're going to learn things which are not gender equal, which is not about mutual respect, which is more about domination, control, aggression, etc.
Right. So, Upasana, how do you
Yes.
think? I mean, do you, like Sangeeta also mentioned that there's a lot to do with how the child is brought up. Of course, there's a lot of influence from his or her friends going on. There are many, many children, they actually look up to their teachers, to their professors. They kind of,
Yeah.
kind of try to emulate many things. So, what, and you've in fact written a piece on this whole issue. So, what are your
Yes.
thoughts?
Actually, couple of things. Sorry, my phone is falling.
No problem.
Okay. A couple of things. One is actually taking forward what was very beautifully put up by my co-panelist, is this entire idea of role models. And, the UN Women has, collated various data from various surveys. And it has very clearly has come out through these kind of surveys and studies, and UN Women has documented it, how children who have seen violence, who have seen violent fathers, who have seen some kind of violence at home as a child, are more prone to engage in this kind of behavior when they grow up. And again, it is not to say that children who engage in, or people who engage in these kind of behavior have necessarily come from dysfunctional families or families who have had histories of violence. But the second point that I want to say is that what is the idea of dysfunction in society? Because there is so much of normalization of violence. Many families do not look at the woman being abused, the woman being told that that you are responsible to do all the household work, nobody else will have you, will help you. The whole idea that it is normalized in many households, that how the mothers, how the daughters, how the sisters in the family are treated, that these are not even considered dysfunctions. This is considered a normal way of life, that this is how women are to be treated.
Right, but how do
Sorry?
you bring about the change? How do you bring about the change in all of these things? Because we can't be, discussing the same thing every time. I mean, maybe within a gap of a month or 2 months, we all end up discussing the same thing. The Nirbhaya case we discussed. We said that we need some strong action, some legal thing. Of course, it happened. Everything happened, but still we continue. Like Boys Locker Room is not the only instance. There was
Because I feel where the problem lies is
Mhm.
this. When we spoke about Jyoti Singh Pandey or the Nirbhaya gang rape case in Delhi, that was a case of violence, that brutal violence that happened in the context of a public space, that spoke about and created an outrage about women's safety in public spaces, right? And also it happened to somebody who belonged to a middle class family. It could be it could be somebody like you or me or anybody, a person like us, and it outraged us. It's not that Nirbhaya was the only such incident that had happened. There have been so many that were happening at the time that the Nirbhaya brutal gang rape
and all
cases
of those
happened.
other cases. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, we were talking about violence against women in the context of the public space. It is not something that we have talked about. And although it seems like that we have been talking about it for a while, there is very little conversation we have had about violence against women within the privacy of home. We have not spoken about it. We have looked at the sphere of the home as something sacrosanct. We have, despite the fact that the Domestic Violence Act came in at 2005 after much struggle, to recognize violence that happens within the home as something against which legal action can be taken. It took us so much time. 2005, we came up with the Domestic Violence Act. We still do not recognize marital rape. It is legal in India for a husband to rape a wife. So this whole understanding of violence that happens within the privacy of home, that violence is not only physical violence, that violence could be psychological in nature, violence could be economic in nature, right? That these are also forms of violence, denying women the right to work, denying women the right over their bodies, denying, the deep-seated patriarchal belief system, sexual division of labor, unpaid care work that women do within the households. We have not
Yes.
talked enough about it.
Right.
And
In fact,
therefore, because we have not talked enough about it, and then there is this whole taboo around talking about violence that happens within the homes, these kind of expressions of violence that you see,
Right.
which becomes locker room talk, places where men can put their guard down.
Right.
I,
Yes.
I mean, as if without the guards, all men, then one would have to assume, would be sexist and misogynist, and I would not like to assume that.
Absolutely. In fact, you
Yeah.
reminded me of the movie Thappar.
Yeah,
Ah,
That the movie portrays so much of what we are discussing now about women within the four walls of our homes, and also we have seen, many of the movies have also highlighted this thing, how uncles or somebody from the family
yes,
kind
yes,
of misbehave when
yes,
molest girl child,
yes.
and nobody talks about it. Not even the mother thinks that should be highlighted or brought to light or talk about it. So
I get to see a lot of clients who come and
yes,
tell me they have been sexually abused. They have been victims of sexual abuse since their childhood, and perhaps one of their uncles or their neighbors have been doing it. And some of them are scared to report it to their parents because parents will not believe in it. And the others who report, these things are, incidents are dismissed. They're never, they say, come on, shut up. People will come to know that's not right.
yeah.
So somewhere people don't address the issues at all.
yeah, because then the larger issue of bringing shame to the family and all of those things takes over. What
Yeah.
the kind of scar, the stress the girl child must be going through, or the girl must be going through, that becomes totally secondary. Nobody thinks that much. And the sad story
That's
here is
where,
even the moms and aunts don't think about the girl child.
and Oineetom, what Upasana has been telling about is the normalization, which we need to think about because it is considered normal. ऐसा तो होता ही है. सदियों
Men
से
will
ऐसा ही होता गया.
yes,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what is normal need not be questioned. अरे ये कौन सी बड़ी बात है? This is not a
right,
big thing because this keeps on happening. This normalization is dangerous.
yes,
And
yeah,
if I may come in, two things.
Yeah.
One is also, I think we all have to be very conscious as a society, and when we have conversations, and we must have these
Yes.
conversations, is not to pitch this question as, a men versus woman question.
right,
It's not like men are aggressors and men are always the perpetrators of violence and women are victims and the receivers of this violence that happens. It is a patriarchal belief system. It has this unwritten script that we all subscribe to. Patriarchy is a belief system that we have all knowingly, unknowingly, intentionally or unintentionally have subscribed to and have helped perpetuate. So to be constantly be self-reflective is, I think, extremely important. And the second important thing is to recognize that that this masculinity in itself is not a problem. We're talking about the idea of toxicity or toxic masculinity as evident in these various kind of locker room conversations. We
Yes.
have to acknowledge the fact that both men and women are equally victims of these kinds of patterns of behavior that are expected of them. Right. So there are also these hegemonies of masculinities. Sissy boys also get bullied. Effeminate men get bullied. Bullying in school is a real problem, and men get more bullied than women and find it difficult to come out and speak about it because men are not supposed to be weak. Right. So this whole idea of hyper masculinity, to understand that men are equally victims of this kind of a narrative as women are. Right. And so this is not something that we need to protect our women from. We also need to protect our men from falling, victims of these ideas of masculinities, hyper masculinities and toxic masculinities. The pressures on men to be the breadwinners. The fact that cases of domestic violence has gone up now because we are all under lockdown in COVID-19, that men who are unable to deal with loss of jobs, loss of livelihood, are taking out their anger on their wives, their mothers, their daughters. Now, one way of looking at it is that, oh, look at these evil men and they're beating their wives up. But the other understanding is that the society has been telling men that you have to be the breadwinner. Who wears the
Yes.
pants in the house is the big conversation. And if his man is unable to wear the pants in the house, the man feels emasculated and therefore resorts to violence in order to say that I'm masculine. You know, if you look at the cases of acid attacks in India, it is the inability to take no, because it is looked at as an attack at their masculinity, as an attack at manhood. So just as much women are victims of these narratives of patriarchy, men are also victims of these narratives of patriarchy.
Right.
And I think
Yes.
we need to be very, very cognizant of that fact.
Yes. Now, to both you ladies, this question of mine regarding the use of the internet, the extensive use of social media. Sangeeta mentioned, which Upasana, I'm sure we all know, in fact, that most of the kids, when left alone, and when the parental guidance or care is missing, they obviously tend to get into the net, and this is how things, they pick up so many things we really don't know. If despite the best of government's efforts, of course, everything cannot be shut. So, and of course, the education system is such these days that you definitely need to depend a lot on the internet. So, how do
Yes.
you strike a balance? How do you monitor? How do you actually handle this particular problem that everybody is facing at this point of time? Sangeeta, first to you, and then to Pasna.
Uh, I would say it is very necessary for parents to spend quality time with their children. We had a subject called moral science, way back. So I don't
Yes,
know if it's still there. But when we had more of joint families, nowadays we have more of nuclear families. We had grandparents living with the children, so they had, they would tell these children stories as they grew up, and stories always had a moral education. We
right.
had moral science, moral education, we had value education. But when it comes to using the internet, or for that matter, watching anything on television, I think it should be monitored. Now, monitoring cannot be something like, children only sit in front of their smartphones or their laptops and parents suddenly rush to them. It cannot be that way. So parents basically need to spend quality time with their children, and proper, I would say a friendly parent-child relationship has to be emphasized on from a very early age. Try and become, this is my appeal to all parents, that try and become a very good friend to your child. You cannot
Right.
replace his friends, because as he grows up to be an adolescent, he will have his own friends, he will have a peer group. And however, continue to be a good friend, so that you come to know about what he's doing, what he's up to, what his tastes are, what is happening in his life, etc. So that way we can monitor and we can prevent a lot of, I would say, mishaps happening in the life of a child. That is one thing. And apart from that, I believe if upbringing is good, if we instill the right kind of values from a very early age, if we tell them what is right and wrong, and yet leave the decision to them, that you decide now, this is your choice. Do not we should not actually impose things and decisions on children also. We must tell them what is right and wrong, and we must ensure that they have the decision making abilities. We must actually instill in them life skills. We call it life skills: problem solving skills, communication skills, then conflict resolution skills, assertiveness skills, etc. We must tell them, not only tell them, we must be role models. We must actually be able to show all that to them through our own behavior and life.
Right.
Once children learn all this, then though they get exposed to different kind of situations, maybe in the school, maybe in the society, maybe outside home, they develop the ability to decide what is right and wrong, and they decide, and they also develop this ability to actually, censor a few things. They don't get into trouble too readily. So we have to actually spend time with the children, develop a friendly relationship with them, talk to them, spend enough time with them, monitor their behavior. And this has to begin at a very early age and instill values in them. And also, we have to, what would I say? We have to practice what we preach, because
Right.
preaching is not patient. We have to practice those values too. That way, children become very strong. They develop very strong personalities. And no matter what they're exposed to in life, they're not vulnerable. And the chances that they go off track becomes very less.
But yeah, of course, a very good point there that parents should try to be friends with their children. But what do you do when you have a very stubborn kid or such? I mean, of course, you are a psychiatrist. You must be getting such
Yes.
cases where the children just would not want to listen to what the parents they are saying. So, in such a scenario, what do you do?
There are two things that I would like to mention here. Number one, how was the child when the child was very young? Was he very stubborn to start with? He or she, whatever, What
Yeah.
was his behavior like as a child? Or has the stubbornness and other undesirable traits is a very recent development because it can be something related to adolescence too. Okay,
Right.
if the child has been like that since childhood, from a very early age, going to a counselor or to a mental health professional may be needed because the child could be having something like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, because of which the child is very impulsive, stubborn, inattentive, etc. Or the child could be having learning problems also in school, for which the child may show some behavioral problems otherwise at home. But if the child is showing a recent change in behavior, it could be something related to adolescence because of the hormonal changes, which is very normal again. Some people show more changes, some people show less changes. Or it could be because of bad influence also during adolescence or even before that, peer group influence. So that way again, if the child is showing the wrong kind of behavior, if the child is very stubborn, not ready to listen to the parents at all, initially try to see what is happening in the child's life. Who are the people he connects with? Who are the people he talks to? Who are the people he mixes up with, etc. Gradually, if we learn to keep an eye on the child very, very tactfully, okay, it must not look like, as if you
Yeah.
are trying to stalk the child or something, follow the child everywhere. So you will get to know what is happening in the child's life. And that way you will be able to find out the causes of his problem behavior and then try to address the root causes in a very tactful manner, in a very matured way. But if the child has gone out of control, then going to a mental health professional, either a counselor or a psychiatrist, may be required. And here I would also mention the importance of counseling services in educational institutions.
Right. Before we go to with all of those to Upasana, there's one more thing that I would want to know from you, Dr. Sangeeta, is that
Yes.
all things that we keep seeing, the recent one being the Boys Locker Room case,
Yes.
because there has been
Yes.
similar instances reported from Jadavpur University. There was this Snapchat incident where a girl was
Yes.
involved, and then there were those 8 boys in that Mumbai case earlier, a few months back. Similar
Yes.
instances. So why does it happen? Is there something, could there be some physical or mental ailment that actually reflects or manifests in such a manner?
Some children, be it a boy, be it a girl, it could be children, it could be adolescents, they have something called an oppositional defiant disorder or a conduct disorder. Now, I'm talking about a particular disorder here. Now, these children from a very early age, they are very defiant. They do not like to follow rules. They like to break rules. They cannot, they do not have remorse or guilt for what they have done. Okay. So they have something called a conduct issues or conduct problem, conduct disorder. But again, we must realize that most of these children come from families where there is some kind of dysfunction. And yes, I have to remember and I have to repeat this, what Upasana had said in the beginning of the show, that again, what is dysfunctional and what is normal again needs to be defined, because a lot of things have been normalized these days, So, but having said that, there is something in the family, there is something in the upbringing, there is something in the past of the child, usually when the child develops a conduct problem. So in incidents like this, which we are discussing, usually the child has a conduct problem. Or sometimes, as I had mentioned earlier, some children have something called an attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, where children are very hyperactive, they're very impulsive, they cannot empathize readily, they do not listen to anybody. They're very, I would not call them defiant, but they're very restless and they revolt a lot. Okay, so children could be having these problems which are psychological in nature also. And there again comes the importance of a school mental health professional in the form of a counselor who can always, she or he can notice, observe. And if something is there, she can talk to the child. And if something, is serious, then parents can be called and things can be discussed. And a strategy can be developed as to how to manage that child so that the child does not get into activities like this.
Okay. Now, Upasana, a lot of things for you to answer about the whole education system, the role of the school, professors, teacher,
Wow.
even and the internet.
I will try. Couple of things. One is actually this very important point about counseling. I think there is so much taboo about counseling. Going to a counselor is seen as such a huge deal that I think we need to break this taboo around the idea of counseling. That is one. Second, I think not to assume that, of course, it is important for the children to have role models which are, which can sort of break these ideas of self-defeating models of femininities and masculinities that we live with. But I think it is also important to recognize that, as a parent, for example, I'm talking about myself, or as an educator, I'm talking about myself. When I'm talking to my daughter, when I'm walking into the classroom, I cannot claim that I have everything sorted in my head, that I am completely, clued in about how gender, caste, class, stereotypes and conventional understandings about sexuality, all of that, how that works, and I have got it sorted, and now all I have to do is impart that understanding to those who are, who I'm supposed to impart this knowledge to. So I think enough attention has not been paid towards counseling of parents, towards training of educators. How are we interacting with our children, as with our adolescent young minds, as educators, as parents? I think that is very, very important. Because I have seen, with my experience of the past more than a decade of teaching, that in many cases, children who have experienced sexual violence, who have experienced sexual harassment, who have experienced some kind of, whether it is in a public space, whether it is in the context of a private space, friends, so on and so forth, find it extremely difficult to confide in their parents because they feel that they would be judged. And therefore, there is this entire taboo that the children cannot go and talk to parents about questions related to sex and sexuality. Children hide from their parents that they're going and seeing a counselor. Because because parents will worry, parents will not understand what is it that they're going through. And there are also to be able to recognize that there are tremendous amount of pressure on the school, college going, the youth of today. They're exposed to a lot more. They are, because of the internet, because of social media, there is instant connection, there is overload of information. To be able to shift through those, information, to be able to recognize what kind of information to take in and what kind of information to discard. There is a lot of pressures on children and questions of mental health. Just now that we are talking about mental health in the context of educational institutions, in the context of families. Otherwise, we've always looked at mental health as mental illness. And therefore it is important to talk about health as not only the health of the body, it's also the health of the mind. How do we understand and construct the health of the mind? I think all of these conversations become important, not only in the context of the classroom or but also in the context of the, familial spaces. And also to understand that, how... certain standards of masculinity and certain standards of femininity then creates pressures for each other. For example, I find it, it is, maa ka doodh piya hai to bahar niklo, is an understanding about this masculine macho image, but also putting pressures on the female body, construction of motherhood, women going into depression because they're unable to nurse their child, because that's the only way to experience true motherhood. So, this competing pressures that femininities and masculinities and how, socially the way we practice them creates have created a lot of impression on the minds of the young people around us. And it's, this certain way to be a man and this certain way to be a woman. And it is extremely important to be able to break out of it. It's not going to happen over a day or a night, not over one or two or 100 conversation, but it is an ongoing battle that has to be fought in many fronts. It has to be fought at the front of the family. It has to be fought at the front of our education system, our political institutions, our economic institutions, which also reflect these realities. I mean, these are social realities that would get reflected everywhere else. So unless and until we start attacking them at all fronts, I don't think so we can expect a change.
Absolutely.
And another thing, it's about disciplining children. How do we discipline children? When we talk about disciplining, we must remember it's something called democratic discipline, which needs to be done. When we talk about democratic discipline, it is about giving rights to children according to their age, culture, or developmental level. But at the same time, we have to give them responsibilities too. Let's say these children who had a smartphone, let's say, now before we hand over smartphone to them, we have to tell them these are your responsibilities. These are the lines. You cannot cross these lines. If you cross these lines, you will not get these rights. Okay. So this starts at a very early age. But some parents think they impose authoritarian discipline on their children, which means that they're very strict, and that way children become rebellious and they try to do what is prohibited. That must not be done. And some parents, because they don't have the time for their children, what they do is they practice what is called permissive discipline, which means that whatever children say, parents will agree to that just because they want their time and space, So that way also children become very loose in every way, and they get involved, they get engaged in other activities which are not very right for them. Not that they do it deliberately, also sometimes because they don't have the maturity and the life skills to understand what they're doing is wrong.
Right. So here there are a few live comments that have come in. So one of them, it says, what if when children behave normally in front of people, in society, in school, but when they are in a safe place like Bois Locker Room, their actual emotions come out. So this is something that Richita Kamal has posted. Would appreciate your response, Sangeeta and Upasana both. Sangeeta first.
Okay, that is a possibility. A lot of children, especially adolescents, they are, I would say, they're clever enough maybe to not to show certain behaviors in the front of their families or certain people, where people may, catch them doing things which are not considered right. And they show this behavior selectively in places where they think it is acceptable, you see, like the Bois Locker Room. But however, if we observe such children very, very minutely, very keenly, then we will see some behaviors in them. Like they are not very, let's say, I'll give you an example. Such a child will not be very social otherwise, he would prefer to spend a lot of time alone in his room. Sometimes he'll stay locked up in his room, because it is not possible for a child to show absolutely normal behavior everywhere else and just be somebody else in a locker's room, boys' locker's room. Okay, so there will be behavioral issues. Maybe the parents haven't spent sufficient time, or maybe they haven't been observant enough to be able to observe what is happening to their child. But if you're a very keen observer, if you spend time with your children, you will find that the child is not having the right kind of thought process, maybe not showing the right kind of attitudes here and there also. It is impossible for a child to be pretentious all the time.
All right. There's one more thing that has come. This is from Dev Ranjan Rajbongshi. He has written, I have always defied rules, never followed a single one of them. I don't feel empathy for humans, but I cry for animals when they are hurt. I respect women, and never ever have I hurt a woman. Do I need counseling? Dr. Sangeeta.
Yes and no, because from what he has told me, what he has told us, what he shared with us, it seems like, of course, it's it's a very short history to comment on this, but nevertheless, I have a feeling that he has issues with only human beings, not with animals. and he also respects women, which shows that he does not have a conduct problem. He never had a conduct problem, and he also does not have something which we call a psychopathic personality or an antisocial personality. Because had he had a problem like a antisocial personality disorder, he would have not respected women, and he would not have respected animals too, because people with conduct problems or antisocial personality traits, they are also very I would say aggressive and violent towards animals too. So from what it appears, from what he has told us, what he has shared from us, that he has had issues perhaps in his childhood or as he grew up with human beings. He has trust issues with human beings, and he must have faced things in life which has made him perhaps indifferent towards human beings, or he has major trust issues. He cannot trust human beings, and that's why he doesn't feel for them. Maybe he has gone through a lot of hurt and pain in his life from another person whom he trusted a lot, or maybe many more incidents have happened. It's not just one incident. In case you don't feel empathy for another human being, in case you cannot connect, you have interpersonal issues in your important relationships, you must definitely go for counseling. But in case, just because he has shared this with us, I feel he's very insightful too. In case you start working on yourself as to why this has happened to you, and is it related to something in your past, something that you've faced in life, something which you haven't been able to get over? If it's something like that, maybe you first try by yourself, learn forgiveness, learn to, move on, and get into positive activities, get into maybe regular exercises, meditation, yoga, etc., to relax your mind and body. But if you cannot handle it by yourself, it's good to see a professional so that you can talk it out with someone who's neutral and someone who's mature enough and trained to. That way, I think your conflicts can be resolved, conflicts related to your past, so that you can have a healthier present and beautiful interpersonal relationships. All the best.
Okay, I hope Mr. Dev is still tuned in, and this is helpful for him. This really answers his query here. Professor Upasana, would you like to come and share your thoughts on all of these?
Yes, of course. Just one thought, actually. I would, or Dr. Sangeeta has already addressed the questions regarding counseling and other things. It is a thought that's coming to my mind, so I'm just sort of reflecting as I'm thinking. Is this whole idea about, the children behaving quote unquote normally in front of parents, and then, behaving not.
Okay,
hello?
Yes,
can I be heard?
Yes, of course. Carry on.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Hello, can you hear me? Am I there?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Carry on.
Yeah, so children behaving normally. Hello?
Yes.
Yes, you're audible.
When, they have, they're with their parents, they're in front of the parents, and not behaving quote unquote normally when they're not with their parents. And I'm in my head thinking, hello?
Yes, please carry on. We can hear you. Yeah. You are very much there. Professor Upasana, you are there.
Hello, I can't hear.
We can still hear you. You can carry on.
Hello?
Carry on. All right.
Upasana, we can hear you.
I can't hear. Okay. So basically, okay, I think I'm back.
Yes.
So the children behaving normally in front of parents, and children not behaving. No.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello? No, you're
All
not
right.
in the show.
Okay, let us quickly, Sangeeta, there's one more thing. I mean, there's this very interesting comment that has come. We'll try fix Upasana's line if possible.
Yes.
One very interesting comment that Madhushmita A has posted. Age-old fairy tales, Barbie dolls, superhero toys, all of these are enough to inculcate gender biases in children at early age.
Yes.
And it happens so early. I mean, you're very well said, very rightly put out there, Sangeeta.
Yes. I mean, I completely agree with what she has said. In fact, to add to what she has said, I would just add those, fairy tales that we had read as a child and we grew up. See, a woman is always portrayed as someone who's submissive, docile, helpless, and a man as someone who's powerful, protective, etc. So we have a lot of issues we have multiple layers, which which we have to address. So it's not just about role models at home, it's also about how fairy tales have been written, and how Barbie dolls have been created, etc. But we have to remember, whoever wrote these fairy tales, whoever created these Barbie dolls, they are also victims of, whatever these age-old norms or gender stereotypes. Everybody is a victim. That way, I think the onus of, the responsibility lies on everybody's shoulder, because we need to look at ourselves, we need to analyze ourselves, reflect, and then see, are we consciously or unconsciously doing or portraying anything which is gender biased? Because all of us need to look into ourselves, and if the answer is yes, we need to change ourselves into more gender neutral persons, because it is not just about talking about gender neutrality. We need to work on ourselves too, and instead of pointing a finger at someone else, let's correct ourselves first.
Right. So there's another comment that has come in, though we don't have the technical expertise maybe to comment on any of these things. These are regarding the legal issues.
Okay, I'm back.
Great.
Yeah.
So Upasana, we were
Hi, I'm back. Can you guys see me? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Something
Yes.
happened.
Yes, we can.
So can I missed something in between, but can I quickly finish the thought that I started with?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. The thing that I was trying to say is about, what is it that, in the context of the locker rooms or in the context of such spaces, what is it that men find exciting to talk about? Why is, so, and why talking about inflicting violence on a woman? Why talking about sharing the woman's photographs, in objectionable state? Why that become a source of pleasure, or a source of guilty pleasure, or a source of, sort of depraved pleasure? And I think that's what we need to understand, that why have those become the standards of depravity? And that has become standards of depravity because we've made women's bodies the repositories of honors of family. We have made women's bodies the repositories of shame. So to look at a woman's body without clothes, or to look at a woman's body in a certain way, it's become a way of shaming that woman, become a way of taking depraved pleasure in it. And I think that has deeply got to do with how we've created standards around bodies of men and women, and how it is such a taboo to talk about questions about body and sexuality.
All right. To both of you, like I was just a while back, in fact, I was just mentioning this to Dr. Sangeeta also. In fact, Professor Upasana, we've got a comment here from Karan Ruben Chaudhary. In fact, I don't think, actually, I don't have a legal expert here to comment on the legal issues, the legal aspects of all of these things. Like, of course, these things are already with the police. The High Court is also looking into the specific Bois Locker Room case. But if either of you would like to take this question that has come, would it be possible to discuss some particular aspects related to the incident in question, that is legal issues surrounding privacy, social media, consent, juvenility, criminality of obscenity as defined by the Indian Penal Code and the IT Act? So if either of you are comfortable in taking this up, would you like to answer this? Because my apologies to Karan and the viewers that we don't have a legal expert at this point of time to actually give the correct viewpoint here. But since it has come, if either of you would like to take it up. Otherwise, we will definitely get back to Mr. Karan and try, get an answer to him from the correct person, the experts, the domain experts.
So I in no way am a legal expert, although I teach at the law school. However, all I can say is this, that particularly in a case like the recent one, which is the Bois Locker Room case, they are all, I believe, would be minors. So I think this will be treated as a case of, juveniles, and will probably be be treated as such. And I think the girls whose photographs have been circulated and so on and so forth are also a minor.
Okay.
So I think it will be treated as such. And I don't want to say something which is not correct and give wrong
Yes.
a wrong legal response. So I
Right.
think that is one. The second thing is that, of course, there are legal mechanisms in place that talks about outraging a woman's modesty, that talks about harassment, both in private and in public
Yes.
spaces. And so on and so forth. But I would not be in a position to comment on the
Right.
exact legal
Yes.
clauses on this, and I don't want to
Yes.
say something which is not correct.
Right, right, right. Exactly, precisely my point
Yes.
too. That we would not like to get into, the legal aspects and,
I
without
think
wrong
both will be
information.
involved in this situation. I mean,
Yeah.
again, I'm not a legal expert, but when we go to Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children's Act,
Mhm.
that is
Mhm.
one which deals with the legalities related
Yeah.
to criminal acts committed by juveniles. That is one, and the other is also the IT Act. I mean,
Yes.
cybercrime and all that. I think it will be
Cybercrime
a
and all of that.
Yes.
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 Yes. Yes. So, concluding remarks from both of you. What do you think is going to be the way forward? Would we continue, discussing, and as journalists, as the media, we keep reporting all these stories, and then we continue having such discussions, or things are going to change? Maybe not in a day or a month or a year, because it has not, but maybe eventually. What are your thoughts to both of you before we
I
conclude?
believe
Yeah.
I believe prevention is always better than cure. We
Mhm.
have made mistakes. We cannot deny that. Be it the upbringing of children, be it the educational system. Because here I want to mention one thing specifically, that let us not emphasize on the numbers that children get in the exams. Instead of that, let the education system emphasize on the holistic development of children. Their character building, what kind of human beings they become. So we have made a lot of mistakes, and we completely understand that. But it's high time we correct our mistakes. Let's focus on upbringing of children, like we have talked about that in details. Let's focus on the education system, and let us also, I when it comes to the legal aspects, I would like to mention here that we have to reform these children. For that, we need to counsel them. Some of them will need to be rehabilitated, especially if they have other issues like drug abuse, etc., or other behavioral problems. But at the same time, sometimes even punishment is necessary, because punishment does act as a deterrent. Even though after the Nirbhaya case, we still have cases like this,
Yeah.
but nevertheless, in the long run, children now, and sometimes, punishment sometimes is kind of it acts as a challenge also to some, especially children who have conduct issues, who are psychopaths, because they
Yeah.
think, let's do this and yet not get caught. So
Right.
it's kind of a thrill-seeking behavior also sometimes.
Right.
But having said that, we have to judge the situation individually. We cannot generalize. This
Yes.
situation could be different from that. This person could be different from that. But nevertheless, we cannot rule out the role of punishment too, because in certain cases, punishment as sanctioned by whatever the prevailing legal system is of a country may be required. Just being a child and doing something, it doesn't mean that you are above or beyond punishment also.
Right. Professor Upasana, your concluding remarks.
Wow. Well, it has been a you know amazingly exciting conversation and very interesting and learning from me. So it is difficult to sort of sum it up and conclude at one go. But I just want to, and this is coming to my mind, that perhaps as a society, it's time for us. It has been time
Yeah.
for us for a long time. We should have done that like yesterday. To reflect on not only questions of normalization of violence,
Yes.
sexism, misogyny, casteism, that have become so deeply ingrained in our psyche, in our daily existence, that I think we should just take a step back and reflect on how we have come to normalize certain kinds of behavior.
Yeah.
If I'm digressing a little, but you put on any comedy show on TV today, and I'm not talking about sex, violence and other things, and most of the jokes are about how a woman is fat. And why is it funny? How, as a society, we have come to think about a certain kind of body type is funny. a certain kind of body to be representing something, that a woman wearing a certain kinds of clothes gives you certain kinds of signals, that as boys, you need to, when you let your guard down, you can do it only by talking about women and women's bodies. And as women, we need to also reflect on how we have come to sanction this kind of behavior, have condoned this kind of behavior. Boys will be boys. These are harmless banter. Girls need to dress up properly to go out. Cross your legs when you sit. What else do you expect when you do this? We need to really start reflecting on what we are saying, how we are behaving, what are the standards that we are setting for generations to come. And I think it is something that we have to do collectively, as families, as communities, as educational institutions, as lawmakers, as policymakers. This is not something that can be done in isolated ways alone, but it has to be done collectively. Collectively, we'll have to reflect as a society. And I think only then we would think of bringing in any kind of change.
Absolutely. Thank you,
And we
ladies,
have
for
to create
joining me.
good human beings, We have to create good human beings. It's not about a good girl or a good boy, but it's about a good human being.
Absolutely.
All right.
Respect each other, because that's the only way to live.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you, ladies. And
Thank you very much.
viewers.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you all. And thank you, viewers, for joining in. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.